In 2016, Nestlé was made aware that its Gerber baby food was contaminated with lead, cadmium, mercury, and arsenic. It did not issue any recalls, it did not inform the public, and it made no effort to address the contamination. We're talking about heavy metals in baby food. After a 2021 congressional investigation, Nestlé did recall some of its products, but there's nothing public to suggest they have attempted to resolve this issue, which was and is caused by Nestlé sourcing the cheapest raw materials they can. This is completely representative of how Nestlé has and continues to operate, with callous disregard for human health and life. Water hoarding, fraud, child slavery, and the deaths of 11 million babies in the developing world. This is the story of Nestlé. Here's Nestlé's then chairman and CEO in 2005. He later became interim chairman of the World Economic Forum.
Die eine Anschauung, extrem würde ich sagen, wird von einigen von den NGOs vertreten, die darauf pochen, dass Wasser zu einem öffentlichen Recht erklärt wird.
By 2025, 1.8 billion people will be living in regions without enough water. Those who emotionally appeal that water should not have any price because it is a human right, they don't look into reality.
The United States Nestlé company has advised me that their research indicates this is actually an indirect attack on the free world's economic system.
Nestlé is a Swiss mega-corporation, and for the last 10 years it's been the biggest of the big 10 food companies that own almost all food and beverage brands worldwide. It's the biggest food company in the world, with over 2,000 brands of coffee, tea, candy, processed food, pet food, baby formula, bottled water, vitamins. It's so ubiquitous, you probably buy their products without even realizing it. You shit. Wait a minute, what do you mean Nescafé is Nestlé? Oh my god. Like many corporations of its size, it got that way primarily through decades of mergers and acquisitions. In the 1860s, an American named Charles Page was the US consul to Switzerland. His brother Georg was a teacher at an American seminary school founded by their uncle, and briefly worked at the Department of Military Affairs during the American Civil War, before moving to Switzerland as well. In 1866, the two of them started the Anglo-Swiss Condensed Milk Company, with 100,000 Swiss francs in capital from several businessmen. Condensed milk already existed, but the company was the first to produce it industrially in Europe under the brand name Milkmaid. Within 10 years, other condensed milk companies sprung up around Europe, and the Anglo-Swiss company aggressively bought them up to eliminate competition. Around the same time, in 1867, a German pharmacist living in Switzerland named Heinrich Nestlé, after many years of mostly unsuccessful business ventures involving fertilizer, liqueur, and sparkling mineral water, finally became successful when he created a breast milk substitute made from powdered cow's milk, sugar, and wheat flour. He wasn't the first to come up with the idea. 2 years earlier, a German chemist named Justus von Liebig patented and marketed a baby formula called soup for infants, killing several babies in the development process. But you know, science can't advance without dead babies. But Nestlé's version was easier to prepare and became successful. The next year, Nestlé shared his method for making powdered milk with his neighbor, chocolatier Daniel Peter, who used it to invent milk chocolate in 1875. The two of them formed a partnership that would become the Nestlé Company. Shortly after, Nestlé sold the company to 3 Swiss businessmen for 1 million Swiss francs and retired. By 1878, the Nestlé Company started selling condensed milk, and the Anglo-Swiss started selling baby formula, putting them in direct competition until 1905, when the companies merged and became the Nestlé and Anglo-Swiss Condensed Milk Company. In World War I, demand for condensed milk increased, and the company obtained lucrative government contracts like supplying the British Army. A milk shortage ensued in Switzerland, and the company expanded by purchasing factories in the US and Australia. By the end of the war, they had 40 factories worldwide, double what they had before. But demand retracted and they began expanding into other products. Nescafé instant coffee was introduced in 1938 to make use of a coffee surplus in Brazil, where they owned a factory, and it became a flagship brand. In World War II, demand increased again, and Nestlé received a contract to supply the American Army with instant coffee in the emergency rations of every soldier, which the Nescafé and Nestlé websites proudly declare to this day. What they don't advertise is that one of its subsidiary companies, Maggi, also supplied Nazi Germany with a contract to supply chocolate to the Wehrmacht. Chocolate produced by thousands of Jewish slave laborers and war prisoners in a factory just across the German border. Chocolate that was used to lure Jewish children into cattle cars to be taken to concentration camps. 2/3 of Maggi's total production during the war went to the Nazis. They even made a special soup for the Wehrmacht. Nestlé's defense of this is that they didn't complete their merger with Maggi until 1947, 2 years after the war ended. But I'm not sure we merged with them after they helped the Nazis is the defense they think it is.
Ja, wenn es so richtig chinesisch schmecken soll, Maggi fix für China-Pfanne. Mit Bambussprossen und der typischen Würzung. Fehlt nur noch das Fleisch.
When the war ended, Nestlé again diversified, pushing hard into the processed food and beverage industries. Some of the products they came up with themselves, like Nestea and Nesquik in the 1940s, but a lot of their growth came from acquisition, purchasing hundreds of existing brands over the next several decades, becoming the corporate behemoth they are today. Stouffer's, Carnation, Coffee Mate, Kit Kat, Smarties, Rolo, Buitoni, Hot Pockets, DiGiorno Pizza, Jack's Pizza, Tombstone Pizza, California Pizza Kitchen, Gerber, Perrier, San Pellegrino, on and on and on. They also bought into companies outside of the food industry, like a minority stake in L'Oreal Cosmetics, the outright purchase of a pharmaceutical and medical device company called Alcon Laboratories, various brands of vitamins and dietary supplements, and pet foods, Alpo, Purina, and Friskies. However, it was in the 1970s that Nestlé faced its first big controversy with the Nestlé baby formula boycott.
The United States Nestlé company has advised me that their research indicates this is actually an indirect attack on the free world's economic system, a worldwide church organization with the stated purpose of undermining the free enterprise system is in the forefront of this activity.
Now you can't seriously expect
Breastfeeding rates in the Western developed world had declined from the late 1800s to the 1950s with the introduction of baby formula, and came to be seen as a lower class thing to do. But rates began to increase in the 1960s due to increased awareness that breastfeeding is unequivocally healthier. It's associated with lower rates of sudden infant death syndrome, lower risk of developing asthma, diabetes, and obesity in later life, better cognitive development, lower rates of autism and ADHD, and a stronger immune system due to antibodies passed from the mother to the baby. Babies who are exclusively fed formula in the first 2 months of life are 16 times more likely to get sick. Breastfeeding is also better for mothers, reducing the risk of type 2 diabetes, ovarian and breast cancers, and high blood pressure. The American Academy of Pediatrics and the World Health Organization recommend exclusive breastfeeding up to 6 months of age and continued breastfeeding alongside complementary foods until 2 years of age. So, as breastfeeding increased in the Western world in the 60s and 70s, companies that produced formula, like Nestlé, turned to the developing world to recoup lost profits, similar to what the tobacco companies did around the same time.
Your baby's growing quickly, so it's no wonder that by the time he's 4 months, his calcium needs increase more than 50%. That's why there's Carnation Follow-Up, the formula with the extra calcium active babies need.
In August 1973, the magazine New Internationalist published a story called Babies Mean Business, where child nutrition experts discussed the troubling trend of formula manufacturers falsely marketing their products as healthier than breast milk in the developing world. But things really kicked off in 1974, when the anti-poverty charity War on Want published an investigation called The Baby Killer, where Nestlé in particular was singled out for its deceptive practices in getting mothers reliant on baby formula in nations like Nigeria, Ethiopia, India, the Philippines, and others. According to the investigation, and others that would follow, Nestlé would send sales representatives to homes and hospitals in the developing world dressed up as doctors and nurses and convince mothers that powdered baby formula was healthier than breast milk. The company would give money, gifts, and even architectural services to hospitals to promote their formula, and gave them free samples for handing out to new mothers in the maternity ward. Once mothers started using the formula instead of breastfeeding, they would stop lactating and would become dependent on it. This practice was highly effective at getting mothers dependent on formula. In Chile, 90% of all children were breastfed in the year 1960, but by 1968 it was down to 10%. Once the free samples ran out, buying the formula became prohibitively expensive. Some mothers began diluting it, desperate to feed their babies that were no longer capable of being breastfed. Many lacked access to clean water and were forced to mix the formula with contaminated water instead. But didn't the formula have instructions saying not to do this? Yes, but they were written in English rather than the native language, and often these mothers were illiterate.
If you take a look at the kind of cans that are used in Caracas, and here I have the S26 formula can, you'll see that the directions are in very small print. The kind of print our people never even look at, because 50% are illiterate, and another 20% would be functionally illiterate.
Many also lacked refrigeration, so if the baby didn't drink all of the expensive formula, some mothers would sometimes leave it out to use later, increasing the chances of illness in babies whose immune systems were not as strong as they would be had they been breastfed. As an aside, breastfeeding also suppresses fertility in mothers, so when babies are formula fed, mothers are more likely to get pregnant again more quickly after giving birth, which I imagine doesn't help much when you're already terribly impoverished. As a result of Nestlé's practices, infant deaths in these countries increased dramatically. It's been estimated that 212,000 babies died each year because of Nestlé at the peak of the controversy.
Well, what do you feel is your corporate responsibility to find out the extent of the use of your product in those circumstances in the developing part of the world? Do you feel that you have any responsibility?
We can't have that responsibility, sir. May I make a reference to...
You can't have that responsibility?
No. How can I be responsible for the water system?
Not talking. I'm talking about the use of your product in those areas.
After the release of the War on Want report and subsequent media coverage, a sustained boycott of Nestlé was launched in the United States in 1977, before spreading to Canada, Europe, Australia and New Zealand. As a result, the US Senate held a public hearing on the matter, and in 1979, the World Health Organization and UNICEF organized a meeting to call for the development of an international code of marketing for baby formula, which led to the founding of the International Baby Food Action Network, or IBFAN. In 1981, the WHO adopted the International Code of Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes, with 118 countries voting in favor. Can you guess who voted against it? Can you guess? The US voted against it, but it was adopted. The code prohibits advertising, free samples, coupons, and promotion of formula in healthcare facilities, prohibits companies from giving money or gifts to healthcare workers, and prohibits them from saying formula is comparable to breast milk, and more.
In the past, the industry has argued that freedom of consumer choice was reason enough to allow its products to be sold, and that they were not responsible for the lack of pure water, the poverty, or the illiteracy of the population. But that argument cannot legitimize a product whose misuse is predictable and calculable. In our research in Colombia, for example, it was learned that only 29% of rural populations and 72% of urban populations had the potable water required for mixing with powdered infant formula. And yet formula was available to consumers and promoted to health personnel throughout that nation.
So that's it, that put an end to the issue. Just kidding. Nestlé began violating the guidelines almost immediately, and reportedly continues to do so to this day. In 2007, The Guardian reported on Nestlé illegally promoting formula in Bangladesh. One doctor there told the paper that 70% of his hospital's admissions are comprised of babies suffering from diarrhea because they've been fed formula mixed with dirty water. The reporters went to another hospital down the street and spoke to a pediatrician named Dr. Zaman, who said company representatives were aggressively targeting healthcare providers. He said they gave out notepads full of sheets of paper showing pictures of Lactogen, a Nestlé brand, essentially marketing materials. The idea, he said, is that when a mother, often illiterate, comes to a doctor seeking advice on breastfeeding, the doctor is supposed to give her one of these sheets to take to her pharmacy, where she will point to the picture of Lactogen and the pharmacist will give it to her. He also said that Nestlé once brought him a big cake for New Year's. These are blatant violations of the international code. 11 years later, in 2018, Nestlé was again accused of violating the code in multiple countries by implying their formula is equivalent to breast milk. In the US, one of their formulas was labelled as our closest to breast milk. In Spain and Hong Kong, labels claimed it had an identical structure to breast milk. In Switzerland, it was following the example of breast milk. In 2023, The Lancet did an entire series about the formula industry and how they're still trying to undermine parental confidence in breast milk by, among other things, trying to convince parents that completely normal infant behaviours, like crying and not sleeping through the night, can be resolved by formula feeding. Babies, huh? How do they work? In short, the Nestlé formula controversy from the 1970s, which is so widely known, is but a fraction of the full picture. They've never truly stopped their aggressive, dishonest marketing practices. It just depends on what they're able to legally get away with in particular regions. In all, from 1960 to 2015, it's been estimated that 10.9 million babies in the developing world have died because of Nestlé. Not all formula companies combined, just Nestlé. And the formula issue isn't the company's only foray into baby product controversy. In 2007, they spent $5.5 billion to acquire Gerber, which markets bottles, teethers, baby vitamins, and baby life insurance, and is the world's biggest manufacturer of baby food. In the following years, the company had a number of issues with dangerous products, but one of the worst was in 2021, when they were accused of knowingly selling baby food contaminated with dangerously high levels of toxic heavy metals, including lead, cadmium, mercury, and arsenic. These are known neurotoxins that cause a slew of health problems across multiple body systems and have been associated with ADHD and autism spectrum disorder.
Dr. Garner says the report coming out days ago makes it
hard to document something when you don't know that you need to be documenting it. Hopefully, babies will have consumed not enough of these products to cause long-term problems or damages. But I think the answer right now is that we just don't know.
In September 2021, the US House Subcommittee on Economic and Consumer Policy investigated the matter, involving Gerber and 6 other manufacturers. Their report confirmed that multiple products had been contaminated and said that Gerber failed to submit all of the testing information requested by the committee, only submitting data regarding arsenic, and only for 4 of their many products. One of these products, Gerber's probiotic rice banana apple cereal, contained 4 times the safe limit of arsenic. If that's the only information they were willing to share, I have to wonder what they held back. The report noted that Gerber rarely tests for these substances, and they only test ingredients, not the final products, and use faulty testing methods. What's more, the report found that Gerber was aware of their products being contaminated, but did not institute a recall. It was also found that Gerber, owned by Nestlé, could have avoided the contamination by sourcing better ingredients, but chose not to for the sake of greater profits. The details of how much they knew came out later. As I said at the beginning, it turns out independent food safety advocates tested these products back in 2016, discovered the contamination, and warned Gerber about it, and were ignored. So babies were eating these toxic substances for 5 years before the congressional investigation brought it to light. The extent of the damage caused is still not realized. There's an ongoing series of class action lawsuits against the company from parents around the US who say that their babies incurred neurological damage and permanent health effects as a result of eating Nestlé's Gerber baby food. Whether anything will come of these lawsuits is difficult to say. The standard defense for a company like Nestlé tends to be along the lines of, well, you can't definitively prove that your baby eating our toxic products is the cause of their condition. I mean, loads of food contains lead and cadmium and mercury. Could be anything. It should be noted that Nestlé isn't the only company selling contaminated baby food. They're just the biggest. In 2020, the non-profit group Healthy Babies, Bright Future performed a study on 168 baby foods and found that 95% were contaminated by heavy metals. We got the lead out of the gasoline just to feed it to our babies. As Socrates once said, what the fuck are we doing, people? It's also worth mentioning briefly how hard Nestlé has worked to undermine public messaging on junk food, which is the majority of their products. For decades, they've been blaming consumers for eating junk food, while also trying to convince us that it isn't junk food. In 2021, an internal company presentation meant for its top executives was leaked to the press. In the presentation, Nestlé admitted that 70% of its food products and 96% of its beverage products aren't healthy and never will be healthy, no matter how much they renovate. Needless to say, they've spent plenty of time and money looking out for their junk food interests. In the US, they spend between $1 and $5 million per year on lobbying that we know about, in addition to local and federal campaign contributions, and they're prolific in the revolving door of government, the practice of hiring former regulators or congressional staff members as lobbyists, ensuring they'll be friendly to their company because there might be a high-paying job waiting for them when they leave government. In particular, Nestlé has lobbied bills relating to nutrition assistance programs like WIC and SNAP, baby food and formula safety, and food labeling. None of that is surprising, of course. What's more surprising is how much they've invested in their Nestlé Health Science division. I would argue, selling remedies to problems often caused by the very foods they sell in what I like to call vertical integration of shit. Do you not get enough vitamins, and is your gut microbiome destroyed due to a lifetime of eating Hot Pockets with a strawberry Nesquik? Buy Nestlé supplements and medical food products, Nature's Bounty, Garden of Life, Solgar, Boost, Pure Encapsulations, Puritan's Pride, Resource, Nutrin, Nutrin Junior, Nutrin Senior, Meritine, Complete, Need to lose weight, metabolic disorder, gastrointestinal disorder, not enough fiber, joint problems, diabetes, tube feeding. Nestlé Health Sciences has got you covered and may be reimbursable by Medicare or Medicaid. They've also had quite a lot of recalls over the years. Metal shavings in Nescafe in 2001, E. coli in Toll House cookie dough in 2009, horse meat in Buitoni pasta in 2013, beef from diseased cows in Hot Pockets in 2014, lead in Maggi noodles in 2015, live insect larvae in Cerelac baby formula in 2015, bits of glass in Stouffer's, DiGiorno, and Lean Cuisine in 2016, bits of plastic in Lean Cuisine in 2020, ethylene oxide, a carcinogen, in 46 varieties of ice cream in 2021, glass and plastic in Hot Pockets in 2021, E. coli and Buitoni pizza in 2022, which killed 2 children, plastic in Toll House cookie dough in 2022, wood chips in Toll House cookie dough in 2023, Chronobacter bacteria in baby formula in 2023, 2 million bottles of Perrier contaminated with fecal bacteria in 2024. These are just a few of the most notable instances. They're also feeding your pets and investing in veterinary clinics. They've owned Friskies since 1985, Purina since 2001, and several other brands of pet products. Plenty of recalls there as well. Salmonella, bits of plastic, mislabeling. More concerning to me is buying up veterinary clinics to price gouge pet owners. In 2019, Nestlé bought a minority stake in the private veterinary company IVC Evidencia, which operates 2,500 clinics and emergency centers across 20 countries, and is the biggest provider of veterinary care in the UK. The company purchases independent vet clinics and doesn't change the name or branding, so customers don't realize they're owned by IVC. Nestlé increased their stake in 2021 to an undisclosed amount, though the primary shareholders remain private equity groups. In the last few years, reports have surfaced that vets in IVC clinics have been pressured to increase revenue at any cost, pushing up prices and encouraging pet owners to buy unnecessary procedures. In 2025, the BBC spoke to 7 vets working for IVC, who said the company encourages them to compete with other IVC clinics over who can make the most money, urges them to perform a minimum number of certain procedures, urges pet owners to seek expensive emergency care when it isn't clinically necessary, and encourages vets to hide the full cost of certain courses of treatment. UK regulators have said that independent practices have been swallowed up by just 6 large corporate groups, and IVC is the biggest. In 2013, 10% of practices in the UK were owned by these groups. Today, it's 60%. This has led to skyrocketing prices for veterinary care, a 60% increase from 2015 to 2023. And of course, Nestlé encourages vets to recommend their brand of pet food, with a direct selling program that offers commission on any sales.
Purina knows what cats love most, and it comes in a little blue can.
Building vet clinic monopolies to allow for price gouging, no big deal, I guess. What about child slavery in chocolate production? This isn't a problem exclusive to Nestlé, but rather the entire chocolate industry, including the biggest producers, Nestlé, Mars, and Hershey. This has been an issue for a long time, but there was increased public awareness around the year 2000 after the airing of the BBC documentary Slavery: A Global Investigation, and subsequent media reports. This led to the creation of the Harkin-Engel Protocol in 2001, an international agreement to end child slavery and trafficking in the chocolate industry. Nestlé was one of several producers that promised to get rid of the worst forms of child slavery in their supply chains. This was a non-binding, voluntary measure which would allow the industry to essentially self-regulate without any legal ramifications for non-compliance. They promised that by 2005 they would implement a certification standard showing that their products were made without child labor. The deadline passed, no such certification was implemented, and they were given an extension. At that point, the International Labour Rights Fund filed a lawsuit against Nestlé and 2 other food conglomerates on behalf of 3 million children who had been trafficked to a cocoa plantation in Ivory Coast. In 2010, the case was dismissed, with the court determining that the corporations could not be held liable because these events took place outside of the US. Each time the new deadline arrives, when Nestlé has promised to eradicate child slavery, they get another extension. And so, what has been called an epidemic of child slavery continues to this day. To summarize this case and other reports, what happens is that children as young as 5 years old are trafficked from various African nations, which produces about 2/3 of all cocoa worldwide, supplying Nestlé and other producers. Often they arrive by bus, with no idea where they are and no travel documents. Sometimes they are promised paid work, sometimes they are tricked into thinking they're going somewhere else. When they arrive, they are held captive by armed guards and forced to work for free up to 14 hours per day. They are beaten and whipped by guards, kept in windowless rooms at night, receive very little food, and are not allowed to speak to each other. Children who try to escape have their feet cut open. They are slaves. The Washington Post did a story in 2019 where a reporter visited one of these farms, describing young boys with deadpan, almost vacant expressions. The reporter asked one child how old he was. He said 19, glanced nervously at a nearby guard watching him, then bent to the ground and wrote 15 in the dirt. Eventually, he confided to the reporter that he'd been working on the farm since he was 10 years old, and that he thought he was going to his school, but was taken to the plantation instead. In 2021, there was another lawsuit, this time a class action on behalf of 8 child slaves against Nestlé, Mars, Hershey, and several other companies. They had been tricked into coming to the farms in Ivory Coast and were held captive, working for free for several years. The youngest was 11 when he was trafficked. The case made it to the Supreme Court, who ruled 8-1 that once again the companies could not be held liable because these abuses happened outside of the United States. And so it continues. Nestlé's argument has always been that they can't control what happens on these farms. But the truth is, as one of the biggest chocolate producers in the world, they could easily put an end to this by refusing to buy from these places. This is what happens when industry is allowed to regulate itself and is unchecked by the consumer. Needless to say, Nestlé has its grubby fingers in quite a few terrible pies, but probably its most long-lasting, enduring and widespread controversy, or controversies, are those surrounding its bottled water business. But first, here's an ad for some garbage.
Hey Bart, want to trade lunches? No way, dude. I got each of the 4 food groups. Sandwich group, cow group, jungle group, butterfinger group.
The company took its first big step into the water market in 1969, when it acquired a 30% stake in Vittel Mineral Water, but things really kicked off in 1992 with the founding of Nestlé Waters HQ. Over the next decade, they assembled a bottled water empire, with over 80 brands worldwide: Perrier, San Pellegrino, Poland Spring, Arrowhead, Aquapanna, Ice Mountain, Deer Park, and Nestlé Pure Life, quickly joining Coca-Cola and Danone in dominating the bottled water market. According to the most recent estimate that I can find from 2021, Nestlé withdraws nearly 26 billion gallons of water per year. And beginning in the early 2000s and continuing today, they faced a litany of criticism over their water extraction businesses, namely hoarding freshwater supplies in the name of profit. If you aren't aware, there is a current and further looming crisis in the availability of fresh water. In 2020, Wall Street investors began trading water futures as a commodity for the first time, anticipating that climate change, drought, pollution, and pumping water faster than it replenishes is going to make potable water the oil of the 21st century. But more on that on the next video of this series. Nestlé is no exception in seeing this crisis on the horizon and looking to profit from it. A lot of the scrutiny that began in the year 2000 at the World Water Forum, when the then chairman and CEO of Nestlé, Peter Brabeck-Letmathe, famously said that access to water should not be a human right. And Nestlé, alongside other corporations seeking to privatize water, successfully persuaded the WWF to downgrade water access from a human right to a human need. In 2005, Brabeck-Letmathe repeated this sentiment in the documentary We Feed the World, saying that it's extreme for water to be considered a human right, and that it should be seen as a foodstuff like any other, with a market value attached.
Das heißt, als Mensch sollten Sie einfach Recht haben, Wasser zu haben. Das ist die eine Extremlösung. Ich persönlich glaube, es ist besser, man gibt einem Lebensmittel einen Wert, sodass wir alle bewusst sind, dass das etwas kostet, und dann anschließend versucht, dass man mehr spezifisch für diesen Teil der Bevölkerung, der keinen Zugang zu diesem Wasser hat, dass man dann dort etwas spezifischer eingreift, und da gibt es ja verschiedene Möglichkeiten. Also.
After some uproar on social media, he walked back these comments, saying that the clip was taken out of context and that he does, actually, see water as a human right. Just not water to wash your car with. The water to flush your toilet with, that's a human right. Even though his company helped convince the WWF that it isn't. But this was just the beginning. Let's go through some examples of Nestlé's inexcusable actions across their many brands of bottled water. Just a few of them. If I were to do all of them, this would be a 10-hour video. Poland Spring. In 2003, a class action lawsuit was filed against Nestlé for false advertising, because the labels on Poland Spring bottled water claimed that it was naturally purified spring water from Poland, Maine. They advertised it as found deep in the woods of Maine and exceptionally well protected by nature.
We actually provided shower stalls for them, and they were to put on their white linen uniforms and clean shoes. Their shoes could not be worn outside the building either.
In fact, the spring in Poland, Maine had run dry in 1967. Nestlé was pumping regular groundwater, filtering it and calling it spring water. One of the pumping sites was in a parking lot next to a heavily used highway. Another site was beneath an old garbage dump and below an illegal disposal site contaminated with human sewage. Nestlé settled the lawsuit without admitting guilt and paid $10 million in charitable contributions and discounts. Those sites are still used for Poland's spring water today, so enjoy drinking your shit water. Some of it also comes from town water supplies in Maine. In the early 2000s, in the small town of Freiburg, Nestlé was buying 110 million gallons of the town's water each year and shipping it to their bottling plant.
Water falls from the earth, or falls to the earth by precipitation, infiltrates the earth, and then discharges to surface water. It's continually moving. So in that respect, it doesn't stay in one place. And so the concept of ownership really doesn't apply.
Local residents noticed the water table dropping and their wells running dry. In 2004, the town itself ran out of water because of a pump failure. Nestlé, using a different pump exclusive to them, were able to keep water extracting while townspeople had water brought in on trucks. Residents protested, seeking a provision to ban the town from selling their water to Nestlé. They lost, and Nestlé got approval for a new 25-year contract to lease a pumping station for its own exclusive use and the right to pump 219 million gallons per year.
The protesters insist they should have some say about how much Poland Spring is allowed to pump and where.
You can't just have a meeting with 20 people here.
When most of them were not allowed into a water board meeting in Kennebunk, they said it was typical of how such deals are made without enough public input. The few who were let in argued against a 30-year deal the board was going to make with Poland Spring, which is owned by Nestlé Waters, a large multinational corporation.
You live here and you're responsible to us, not to this corporation, and you cannot violate your public trust.
In 2017, there was another class action over Poland Spring being fraudulently advertised as spring water, with the plaintiffs' lawyers saying that out of the billion gallons of Poland Spring that Nestlé sells each year, not a single drop comes from natural springs. Again, it's just groundwater that's being sold as spring water because people will pay more for it. The lawyers call it a colossal fraud perpetrated against American consumers, and allege that Nestlé built 6 phony, man-made springs to comply with the law, while actually selling water that came from those garbage dump and sewage sites, in addition to pond water. The lawsuit was initially dismissed for technical reasons, but was amended and refiled, and is currently ongoing.
What is it? Poland water. Right from the spring. Real water. You can read right here on the bottle. Poland Spring, Maine. Picture right up.
Arrowhead. In 2015, the Desert Sun newspaper published an investigation which found that Nestlé had been illegally pumping 45 million gallons of water per year from Strawberry Creek in the San Bernardino National Forest. Strawberry Creek is a tributary of the Santa Ana River, which provides drinking water to 750,000 people. They were pumping this water for free on federal lands using a permit that expired in 1988 for their Arrowhead brand of bottled water. And the expired permit only allowed for pumping 2.5 million gallons per year. They did this for decades, during multiple droughts when Californian residents were told to conserve water. A Nestlé resource manager named Larry Lawrence was quoted as saying, "The argument that there should be some flowing stream bed in Upper Strawberry Creek, we don't necessarily believe that, and that's something we're testing for." The Forest Service didn't know about this until the Desert Sun investigation, at which point they looked into Nestlé's activities and determined their extraction operation was drying up surface water and leaving some parts of the creek completely dry. The state of California told the company to immediately cease any unauthorized diversions. But 1 year later, the Forest Service gave Nestlé a new 5-year contract to keep pumping. All they had to do was pay a permit fee of $1,950 per year, and they could continue pumping the water on public land maintained by taxpayers. Why they got this new deal is a bit of a mystery. The State Water Board intervened in 2021, issuing a cease and desist, and the matter is ongoing in the courts.
One problem. We can't get it over here.
Arrowhead sparkling mountain spring water.
Nestlé only pays $200 to the state of Michigan for the extraction of more than 130 million gallons of water every year.
There are about 50 water bottling plants located across Michigan. Nestlé says it wants to nearly double the amount of water it already draws daily from its existing source.
In 2001, Nestlé planned to build a new Ice Mountain pumping facility in Mecosta County, Michigan, to feed its nearby bottling plant, which already pumped 400 gallons of water per minute, 500,000 gallons of water per day, from a local spring feeding into Lake Michigan. Locals were against it and protested outside the facility. Some were hit with SLAPP lawsuits, strategic lawsuits against public participation, which are designed to stop citizens from generating negative publicity by exercising their First Amendment rights.
MCWC was still waiting to hear the opinion when the letters from Nestlé were sent to members of MCWC, young people that had expressed their opinion in the press.
My greatest defense was just being as public as I could.
Received a letter that I, Chris Swear, am accused of slanderous or defamatory remarks.
These lawsuits are virtually impossible for the company to win, but that's not their purpose. The purpose is to intimidate citizens by entangling them in extensive legal proceedings so they run out of money and give up. These people weren't activists, they were just regular citizens who didn't want their water resources taken by Nestlé. The citizens enlisted the help of a local environmental group, Michigan Citizens for Water Conservation, and filed a lawsuit for damage to local lakes, streams, and wetlands. In the end, they had to settle, with a deal allowing Nestlé to pump 313,000 gallons of water every day.
We had seen what Nestlé was proposing to do and decided that we needed to take Nestlé to court. That was the only way that Nestlé would ever realize that, yes, we did want our water, we wanted to protect our water, and the water was ours, not theirs. This lasted for 8 years with lawyer fees, and we spent over $1 million.
At one point, Nestlé even offered us some kind of a grant, and Terry said, "Are you kidding? No way."
In 2017, there was yet another Ice Mountain controversy in Michigan, this time involving their plant in the small town of Evart in Osceola County. Nestlé was pumping 125 million gallons per year and submitted a permit application to increase their pumping by 60% to 210 million gallons per year by building a new pump in a children's campground. The cost to Nestlé for the water they extracted, a $200 annual fee, which would not increase with the increase in pumping. Just 2 hours away from Evart, the Flint water crisis was ongoing. Residents were paying some of the highest water bills in the country, up to $200 per month, for tap water contaminated with lead, water they refused to use for anything other than flushing the toilet. The state was sending in bottled water for people to drink, to bathe in, to wash their dishes, everything. When it came out that Nestlé wanted to increase its extraction in Evart while Flint residents were suffering, there was substantial pushback. 81,000 public comments opposed the permit request, with only 75 supporting it. But state officials said they didn't have any grounds to deny the permit and approved it anyway. That same week, the state of Michigan announced they would no longer be sending bottled water to Flint. The next year, in 2018, Nestlé announced they would send 100,000 bottles of water to Flint each week, to be distributed to help centers throughout the city of 80,000 people. Meanwhile, they continued pumping at multiple sites in Michigan, over 400 million gallons per year for Ice Mountain bottled water, earning hundreds of millions of dollars annually, while only paying about $1,600 statewide for this precious public resource, while the people of Flint suffered and got lead poisoning.
When it comes to Nestlé, I don't believe that they should be taking the water out of our ground and selling it.
When Gretchen Whitmer ran for governor of Michigan that year, she expressed on multiple occasions the desire to stop Nestlé from pumping and selling Michigan's water. In her first term, several bills were proposed in the Republican-controlled legislature regarding the protection of Michigan's water, but none of them succeeded or were even considered. Eventually, the attention of the public at large faded away. But there were some wins in Michigan. The towns of Evart and Osceola Township successfully stopped Nestlé from building its new pumping station on the basis that it wouldn't comply with the local zoning laws. Nestlé took them to court and tried to argue that its commercial pumping facility would count as an essential public service, basically calling themselves a utility company, and therefore should be exempt from the restrictions. The courts initially agreed with Nestlé, but the town appealed the decision and won in 2019, with the Court of Appeals writing, "The Circuit Court's conclusion that Nestlé's commercial water bottling operation is an essential public service is clearly erroneous. Other than in areas with no other source of water, bottled water is not essential." Indeed. And this brings me up to the pandemic, when Nestlé increased prices and revenue for the company began to decline, alongside share value. They tried to create a new image for themselves as a primarily health and wellness-based company, and sold off some of their brands while buying others. Buitoni pasta sold to private equity. Some of their candies sold to Ferrero. They bought Aimune Therapeutics, a pharmaceutical company that makes medication for food allergies. Atrium Innovations, a supplement company, licensing rights for Starbucks to produce the store version of their crap coffee. And in 2021, they sold off some of their North American bottled water operations to a handful of private equity companies for $4.3 billion. The deal, however, excluded their premium brands, Perrier, San Pellegrino, and Acqua Panna. Which brings us to one of the most recent Nestlé scandals. In May of 2025, the French Senate released an investigation showing that Nestlé and high-ranking members of the French government had colluded to cover up illegal practices involving Perrier. The brand is marketed as natural mineral water, but it turns out Nestlé has been defrauding consumers for years, charging high prices for Perrier while knowingly using illegal water treatments. The water, which comes from Vergertsey, France, and is supposed to be naturally purified, a term that is strictly regulated in the EU, But at some point, at least as early as 2021, the wells became quite contaminated with fecal bacteria and pesticides. So Nestlé started treating the water with purifiers and ultraviolet sterilization, while selling it as naturally purified spring water for a premium price. They lobbied members of the French government, including in the Ministry of Industry, to allow them to keep selling it as natural water and, according to the Senate report, took deliberate actions to conceal what they were doing, going so far as to create a secret area in one of their plants where the water treatments occurred, with a secret door covered by an armoire that had to be moved out of the way to gain access. A French health agency has said the contamination of the Perrier wells is so bad that production should be halted immediately. What does Nestlé have to say? Well, one of their chief executives said in an interview in February of 2025 that the concept of natural mineral water is a romantic idea that is becoming unrealistic, and regulations should adapt to the reality of human activity. And yet, they were selling consumers on this unrealistic, romantic idea and charging a premium for it, and they made an estimated 3 billion euros on Perrier in the same time this fraud took place. Also, they're not saying shut it down because it isn't romantic, they're saying shut it down because it's full of pesticide and shit. Nestlé may yet face prosecution from the French government over this matter. I mean, you'd hope. Now, as I've said, everything I've covered in this video is really just a small slice, the tip of the iceberg of Nestlé's activities. I didn't even touch on the issue of plastic pollution, which is another can of worms entirely. Just like Coca-Cola, the amount of plastic waste produced by Nestlé is unconscionable and ultimately unsustainable. Coca-Cola ranks number 1 in terms of plastic pollution worldwide, and Nestlé ranks as number 3. And like Coca-Cola, Nestlé has gone so far as to brazenly lie about the recyclability of their bottles. Back in 2008, they put an ad in the Canadian newspaper The Globe and Mail, claiming that most water bottles avoid landfill sites and are recycled, and that bottled water is the most environmentally responsible consumer product in the world. The ad in question is, apparently, no longer anywhere to be found, even on the Internet Archive. For more on this issue, check out my video, The Myth of Plastic Recycling. It'll cheer you right up. So where does this leave us? Nestlé, in my opinion, is truly the epitome of corporate evil. I'd say probably the most antisocial company I can name outside of Purdue Pharma, and they're deeply aware of their image. At Nestlé headquarters in Switzerland, they have a digital acceleration team who do nothing but monitor social media sentiment, ready to do damage control. The company is very powerful and backed by some of the wealthiest people in the world. The top 10 shareholders of Nestlé are all Wall Street financial firms: Vanguard, BlackRock, Georg Capital Management, Norges Bank. Berkshire Hathaway sold their shares back in 2011. Previous chairman and CEO Peter Brabeck-Letmathe, who said water isn't a human right, and who once said humanity shouldn't be playing God by trying to stop climate change, he left Nestlé in 2008, and just this year became chairman ad interim of the World Economic Forum. So I don't think that his ideas, his sentiment, are especially rare, just probably not often said out loud. Nestlé is deeply wealthy, deeply powerful, and will do whatever it takes to get more and more and more. But it's all of us who prop them up by buying all of their shit, by forgetting and ignoring what they've done. If the West, or the global North, if you like, really believed in justice at all, Nestlé would not exist, and numerous Nestlé executives would not be free. But I guess shit isn't that interesting until it hits the fan. Thanks very much for watching. You can support these videos on Patreon, where you can get access to them about a week early, depending on how much I've been thinking. Next time, I'll be talking about Wall Street, private equity, how they're buying up a lot of water in preparation for the looming or widening water crisis. Won't that be fun? It will be. Be very fun. So I'll see you then. Thanks very much. Don't let the bastards grind you down. That's exactly what they want. Fuck 'em. Look, I think we all know what should happen to these people. Calmly, I really think that. Into said river.